There are legends the samurai tell that carry their roots as far back as the ancient days, back before their homes sank beneath the sea, before the devastation. In those days, the island of Nippon, as they called it, was truly the land of the infinite, where spirits and mortals alike dwelled in abundance and in relative peace. The samurai told stories of the various spirits and guardians who stood watch over the people of Nippon. Even today, though their home is long behind them and the war is the only constant, these stories are still told among the samurai. It is from these stories that the Shugoki draw their influence as guardian Oni. It was said that the Oni of Nippon were powerful, destructive, and not to be trifled with. But you could ask for no finer guardians. Every Shugoki warrior trains to embody the power of these Oni demons, so that the samurai will want for nothing from their protectors. The most powerful Shugoki were sometimes believed to be possessed by the vengeful Oni themselves, intent to protect the samurai now in war as they had not been able to a millennia ago. Of course, these were only stories, at least. But Hiroyama Asuma knows better. The Hiroyama family was not wealthy. In fact, they were a rather poor samurai family. They were the vassals to the Lord Fujimori and served loyally, but Fujimori was not himself a widely respected daimyo, so by extension, the Hiroyama were not known or respected themselves. That said, the Hiroyama never abandoned the old traditions and ways of their people. Despite the wars, despite the influences of knights, Vikings, Wulin, and Outlander forces, despite the Horikos and Chimera recruitment camps that sprung up all over Heathmoor, the Hiroyama family never gave in to the changing times, intent to maintain their hold to the values of their old home, to honor the guardians of their people and their ancestors. As Asuma's grandmother would say, if we do not respect and honor the past and those who formed it, what possible future can we expect to build for our children? So, every day, Asuma performed the rituals and rites he was supposed to, even into his young adulthood. Asuma would uphold the honor, integrity, and values of his clan and his ancestors in a hope that it would all bring peace. One of his many duties was to clean and care for the different shrines, idols, and statues his family collected, including his favorite, the Guardian Red Oni. This Oni, his grandparents would say, is our family guardian. From our ancestors back in Nippon to today, we pay respect to this guardian. However, deep in his heart, Asuma couldn't shake the feeling that it was silly to put so much stock in a story or myth or legend. Where was this guardian of the samurai now? Where were the Oni when their island sank beneath the waves? Where were the kami of fortune to honor his family? Why must they live as the laughingstock of the mire when their devout adherence to the old ways should have been enough to draw the eye of their guardian? He asked these questions, of course, but his grandparents always said the same thing. Consider the word Oni and its root. It means hidden, concealed. They are not seen until needed. If you do not see the guardian, it means they are not needed yet. Have faith, even when you cannot see. Asuma was obedient, but he still couldn't shake his doubts. He didn't understand. His people craved peace, so why did the guardian allow them to not have it? When Asa was reaching his 30th decade, the war took an unexpected turn. The ocelot had arrived and began appearing all across Heathmoor, including the mire. Skirmishes were taking place in small and unprotected villages. Asuma couldn't keep praying and hoping for the guardians to protect him and his family. He had to actually step up and do something now. He knew that his family wouldn't approve, but he had little choice. He offered his services as a warrior, as a Shugoki. Asuma had always been a large boy, and strong too, and wielding a club didn't seem all that complicated to him. He'd been accepted at the Daimonji Shugoki school where he began training in grappling, kanabo techniques, and weight training. He was given a strict diet, stricter training regiments, and his own armor to wear. It didn't matter. He carried himself with honor, with duty, and with respect in everything he did, things that his teachers and peers could get behind. But the time for his training was short-lived. War was upon them, and they were soon called to battle. Shugoki are no different than any other samurai. They are not like Aramusha or Hitokiri who go where they please. They are still sworn to their daimyo and their clans, and thus will go where ordered to. As such, Asuma was saddened to hear he'd been called to fight in a campaign against the knights invading the mire's southern border. Wishing his family well, he sallied forth to war, ready to be the guardian his people needed him to be. But war was nothing like what he'd expected. It wasn't like the training. The Ashfeld Knights, consisting of forces from the Emerald Legion, were pushing into the mire with a fury. Their armor was unmistakably strong, able to withstand their arrow volleys, and typical sword slashes seemed little more than to annoy them. It took the might of the Shugoki to break the vanguard of their attacking force, which meant that Asuma was at the front of it, clubs shattering bone and armor alike. The rage of the warriors of the mire sent ripples through the marsh, and as Asuma struck back at a lawbringer who elected to exchange blows with him, his club swung out to meet him. He attempted to parry, but the lawbringer's arms couldn't hold back the crushing blow of the kanabo. He moved it aside. The lawbringer was knocked to the ground, but he rolled quickly and brought his axe up to strike. Quickly, young Asuma tried his best to hold back the attacking knight, but as he held him back, another warden rushed in to strike him. 2-on-1 wasn't a fair fight. He tried to hold back both, struggling with all of his might. Luckily for his good fortune, a Naginata caught the warden across the face, and an Obushi ran to aid him, only for her to be struck down by a conqueror next to her. He turned his attention back to the war, only to discover that his comrades were now breaking. The knights had the upper hand. Fighting as they retreated, Asuma joined his brothers in arms as they rushed to escape, trying his best to hold out, as the Emerald Legion took flight after them. It wasn't long before the Emerald Legion had taken the first checkpoint, and Asuma was struggling to wrap his mind around it. Staggering back home was difficult for him. He was hurting not just physically, but emotionally. He'd failed. His very first battle, and he'd failed to resist the Emerald Legion. He'd failed to defend anything. He'd fought the way he'd trained. He lived the way he'd been taught. But he'd watched his comrades get slain all the same. He'd been unable to make a meaningful difference. Did Shugoki not embody the guardian deities of old? Were they not meant to be the ultimate warriors, the ultimate protectors? And yet they had been dealt a crushing blow. What did they lack? What did he lack? His thoughts were brought to a halt by the sound of a scream ahead of him. He looked on and saw the fate of his home village, burned to cinders. Bodies were everywhere. Some burned to death, others strewn in heaps, flowing with blood like a macabre fountain. Houses were alight with fire, each one like a giant torch in the evening sun. Samurai broke ranks to run to their homes, to check on family, friends, anyone that still lived. But none could be found. Asuma stood as stiff as a statue as he took in the sights. He pulled his demon mask from his face and staggered step for step into the hell he'd returned to. How could this have happened? The Emerald Legion was behind them. There's no way they'd reached his home. What had become of this? Why had it happened? Had he taken the time to look, he might have noticed the helmet of a warmonger amongst the littered garbage, and a few traces of draconite still pulsing among the embers. A Horkos attack on a village too weak to be of any value. But this didn't concern Asuma now. He barely noticed as his comrades screamed, wailed, and some even slit their own throats in anguish. He merely walked to his home, which, like the others, was alight with flame. He stared at it, at the burning cinders of his once modest home. He could smell the burning wood, paper, and flesh. And he also saw the old idols, statues, and trinkets scattered about and smashed, all the things he'd had to clean and take care of as a child, show reverence to, all destroyed. Well, all but one. He took a few steps towards the dangerous fire, stepping lightly into the inferno as flames danced around him. He didn't care about the heat or the suffocating smoke. He had to see this statue, this one stone idol, the red guardian Oni. He glared at it, its red face contorted in that look of rage and austerity. Asuma fell to his knees and tears ran down his face. How am I to have faith in what I cannot see, when all I can see is devastation? He cried. You lied to me, grandmother, and now you are dead. There is no faith I can cling to, no guardian to protect you, and now I have nothing. He turned his eyes to the demon. You were our guardian deity. Why were you not here? He wailed into the fire, into the deceased, into the tragedy. Demon. A voice. Asuma thought he heard a voice in his head, someone speaking to him. Grandfather, grandmother, he couldn't place it. He raised his head swiftly to look around, but all he saw was fire and smoke. Demon. Asuma felt the warmth of the fire, but it did not burn. He felt the rage of the smoke, but it did not choke him. He felt something, an understanding entering his consciousness. Oni. Originally it meant hidden, and he thought this meant that his guardian would reveal himself when needed, but that wasn't right. It wasn't that the guardian was hidden somewhere else, but inside him, in his heart. What was a Shugoki but a demon? You call it a deity. Why is your family guardian a deity? Is it not a demon? Why is your family guardian a demon? The voice demanded. Because a guardian is not meant to bring peace, but to carry with it the hellfire of war. Yes, Asuma snarled. Those who stand against your family, your home, your people, will taste the fires of hell. Yes, Asuma agreed. Bring justice down upon them. You are a demon of war. Be reborn in this fire and become a demon, an Oni, a guardian. Let no foe cross your path, lest they be drawn to the pits of hell. Asuma didn't know if the voice was in the statue, or if it was just him speaking to himself, but with every passing phrase his anger bubbled and boiled over. His fists clenched and he grabbed for his kanabo. He put his mask back on over his face, and he stormed out of his family home. The remaining soldiers who he had returned with noticed something emerge from the ruins of the Hiroyama estate, and what they saw made them scream. It was not a man, but a demon wreathed in red fire. Akaoni, a red ogre. The Horkos band that had attacked were known as the Blood Beasts, a small band that had remained in the mire after the Horkos' initial invasion plan failed. They were responsible for several hit-and-run attacks throughout the swamps, working to weaken the mire internally. That small village was just one of many they'd ransacked, and thanks to the Emerald Legion's attack, there were fewer warriors to defend the smaller outlying villages. Without homes to return to, the morale of the samurai would weaken, their resolve would falter, and with it, Horkos could try again to claim the mire. It had been 3 nights since their attack, and they were holding a small feast for themselves in an abandoned temple deep in the marshes of the mire. When suddenly, one of their lookouts shouted something. A small detachment of samurai were coming their way. The blood beasts all sprang to action, prepared themselves for battle. They knew it was only a matter of time before the samurai sought them out for revenge. They were ready for whatever stormed out of those trees. But what they didn't expect was what they saw. Like a great red beast burning with hellfire, his masked face a series of golden fangs and tusks. Horns rose from his head, and his crimson armor scorched and flashing in the light of fires around him. He was the very picture of a demon, a being drawn from the pits of hell. A red demon. He charged the Horkos warriors. From their number, a Hitakiri ran out to meet the demon, his large axe raised to strike down the brute, but to his horror, the monster didn't even slow down as he raised his club and swung it into the axe, bringing both weapons downward. With the axe buried in the kanabo, it was useless to the Hitakiri. The psychopath tried to pull it free, but leaning forward to yank it out was his final mistake, as the great red demon swung his massive hand out to grab his face. The other hand grabbed the back of the Hitakiri's head and began to crush his skull. The screams of the Hitakiri reached ear-shattering levels that left the Horkos warriors backing away. And with a sudden crack, the Hitakiri stopped screaming, his skull cracking like an egg and his body slumping to the ground as brain matter dribbled from his orifices. The red demon raised his foot and slammed it down on the dead Hitakiri's head, crushing it further. Then turned his eyes upon the Horkos warriors and roaring, terrifying them. Some fled, others tried to hold their ground. Any that stood in the path of Asuma were beaten to a bloody pulp. The musical chorus of shattered bone and screaming throats filled the swamp, and small villages around that heard it believed an Ayakashi or yokai of some sort was on a rampage. And they were more right than they realized. Asuma cared little that his grandparents wouldn't approve of his behavior. They didn't need to approve. What the mire needed was not an honorable, peaceful, devout young man, they needed a guardian demon. The Blood Beasts never reported to Astria again after that night, and though the Emerald Legion did make more headway into the mire, they were eventually ground to a halt at the darker corners of the swamplands. A legend persisted there of a red guardian demon of war, an Akaoni. When one heard the roar of this demon, it was in your best interest to flee, for none dared cross his path, lest they be dragged to the pits of hell.